Okay, let's get into this. It's quite a paradox, isn't it? A candidate comes out of almost nowhere, promises calm, wins this massive landslide.
And then his presidency is seen as, well, pretty disastrous, a real low point, actually. And it happens right before everything really unravels.
Exactly. So today on the deep dive, we're tackling 1852, the election, Franklin Pierce, and why it all matters so much more than you might think.
It's fascinating because you have to picture the U.S. in the early 1850s. I mean, the country's just buzzing, right?
Yeah, bursting at the seams.
You've got all this new territory after the Mexican War, people flooding west for the California gold rush, railroads starting to snake across the landscape. There's this real energy.
A feeling of momentum, definitely. But like our sources point out, underneath all that excitement, there's this huge, unavoidable problem.
Slavery, yeah. The festering wound, as it's often called. It's poisoning everything.
And they tried to fix it, or at least patch it up, with the Compromise of 1850.
Right, the intention was good, maybe, to calm things down between North and South. But one key part really blew up in their faces.
The Fugitive Slave Act.
That's the one. It was meant to appease the South, but forcing Northerners to participate in returning escaped slaves, it caused absolute outrage, made the divisions even deeper.
So trying to find common ground actually made things worse, like you said, pouring fuel on the fire.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And politically, you've got the two main parties, the Whigs and the Democrats. Just terrifying.
Walking on eggshells.
Totally. They desperately want to avoid talking directly about slavery because they know it could just shatter their parties and maybe the whole country.
So maintaining the Union, even if it meant ignoring the elephant in the room?
That was the calculation.
Yeah.
So our mission today, really, is to see how this seemingly minor election with this less than stellar candidate actually reveals just how fragile everything was.
And how it pushed the country further down that road to civil war.
Precise.
Okay, let's start with the Whigs. They'd had presidents before, Harrison, Taylor. But by 52, they seemed to be falling apart. What happened at their convention?
Well, the convention itself showed just how broken they were. I mean, think about it. They ditched their own sitting president, Millard Fillmore.
Why? Because he enforced that Fugitive Slave Act.
Largely, yes. He became really unpopular in the North because of it. But they also passed over Daniel Webster, a party giant, though his health wasn't great.
So it wasn't just about choosing a leader, it showed the party itself was cracking up.
Exactly. The Whigs were always this kind of big tent party, lots of different interests. But slavery was the issue they just couldn't paper over anymore, just tearing them apart from the inside.
And who did they end up nominating? General Winfield Scott, war hero from the Mexican War. Old fuss and feathers.
Yeah, you'd think a war hero might be a unifying figure, right?
Seems logical.
But Scott, well, he wasn't much of a politician. And critically, nobody was quite sure where he really stood on slavery. That ambiguity might have seemed safe, but it just alienated people, especially Southern Whigs.
So the military fame wasn't enough to overcome the party's divisions.
Not even close.
Yeah.
He couldn't bridge that gap.
Okay, now the Democrats. Their convention sounds like pure chaos. 48 ballots.
38. Yeah, it took forever. Which tells you they had their own tensions too, make no mistake. But they were maybe a bit better at finding a way through.
And somehow out of all that emerges Franklin Pierce.
The ultimate dark horse. I mean, former senator from New Hampshire, but his record was, well, pretty forgettable.
So why him? Was it because he was forgettable?
That was kind of the point. He hadn't made powerful enemies. He hadn't taken strong, controversial stands. He was sold as a Northern man with Southern principles. Meaning he supported the Compromise of 1850, including the Fugitive Slave Act, and he promised basically not to rock the boat on slavery. He signaled stability.
So in a country desperate to avoid conflict, being sort of bland was actually a selling point.
It absolutely was. He seemed like a safe pair of hands who wouldn't ignite the powder keg.
And there's the third party, the Free Soil Party. John P. Hale, what was their angle?
Very straightforward. No expansion of slavery, period. Keep it out of the new Western territories.
So focused entirely on stopping slavery's spread.
Yes, arguing those lands should be for free white labor, not competing with enslaved people. An economic argument as much as a moral one for many of them.
But they didn't really make a dent in the election itself.
No, not really. Their message, while clear, was just too radical for the mainstream in 1852. Most voters, and certainly the major parties, were trying desperately not to confront slavery head-on.
So the Free Soilers were seen as too disruptive.
Long shot, yeah.
Yeah.
The country just wasn't ready or willing to go there yet.
It really does sound like the main campaigns, Whig and Democrat, were actively trying not to talk about the biggest issue facing the nation.
Oh, completely. Both parties publicly said, yep, we support the Compromise of 1850, everything's fine, let's move on. They just wanted slavery off the table.
How did that play out in their strategies? The Whigs.
The Whigs mostly relied on Scott's image, the war hero thing, hoping that would be enough. They also did some interesting early outreach to immigrant groups, Germans and Irish, with translated materials. Yeah, kind of ahead of their time there.
And the Democrats, how did they campaign for Pierce, the safe guy?
They went negative on Scott, painting him as an elitist, kind of out of touch, maybe even a bit too friendly to abolitionists, which was toxic in the South.
Well, Pierce was?
Humble, patriotic, reliable, safe. And they had that slogan.
Right. We poked you in 44, we shall pierce you in 52. Linking him to James K. Polk and Manifest Destiny expansion.
Exactly. Alluding to past glories without actually addressing the current mess. It was clever marketing, in a way. All about reassurance, not substance on the key issue.
And the Free Soilers just kept hammering on slavery.
They did. Talking about the evils of slavery, land reform. But yeah, their voice just wasn't reaching enough people. Or maybe people just didn't want to hear it then.
So, looking behind the campaigns, what really drove that Pierce landslide? You mentioned the Whig problems.
It really boils down to that Whig disunity. They were just fundamentally split. North versus South, disagreements on economics, not just slavery. They couldn't hold it together.
Whereas the Democrats, despite their long convention, managed to project some unity.
A fragile unity, maybe, but enough. They rallied around supporting the compromise and keeping the status quo. They were just better organized or perhaps less fundamentally divided at that specific moment.
And the results were just brutal for the Whigs.
Absolutely devastating. Pierce won 27 out of 31 states, took states the Whigs usually counted on. Scott only got 42 electoral votes to Pierce's 254, a total wipeout.
And the Free Soilers?
Didn't win any states, got less than 5% of the popular vote. Shows you where the country's mood was.
So this election was basically the death knell for the Whig Party.
Pretty much. They just disintegrated after this. That huge defeat exposed their fatal weakness on slavery, and it really cleared the way for a new party to emerge, focused explicitly on opposing slavery's expansion.
The Republicans.
The Republicans, formed just a couple of years later.
Okay, so Pierce wins this massive victory, promising calm. But his presidency, 1853 to 57, it's remembered as anything but calm or effective.
Yeah, it consistently ranks among the least effective presidencies. He genuinely seemed to want to keep the Union together, but his main strategy was, well, basically giving the South what it wanted.
Appeasement.
Appeasement. He thought by siding with Southern interests, he could soothe tensions, but it just made the North angrier and more suspicious.
Which leads us straight to the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. This was huge.
Absolutely pivotal and incredibly damaging. The idea pushed by Senator Stephen Douglas was popular sovereignty.
Letting the settlers in Kansas and Nebraska decide for themselves if they wanted slavery.
Exactly. Sounds democratic maybe on the surface. Let the people decide. But it blew up the previous agreements, specifically the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had banned slavery in that territory. It basically reopened the entire question of slavery's expansion.
It led to violence.
Terrible violence. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed into Kansas, trying to control the territory. It became known as Bleeding Kansas, a mini-civil war, really.
And Pierce's role.
His administration tended to back the pro-slavery groups, which just further alienated the North and made the situation worse. It completely backfired as a unifying measure.
Wow. And there was more controversy, too, wasn't there? Something called the Austin Manifesto.
Ah, yes. That was another gem. Basically, a secret plan cooked up by American diplomats in Europe.
Secret plan for what?
To get Cuba from Spain. Buy it if possible, but take it by force if necessary.
Why Cuba?
To turn it into more slave territory. Expand the South's power.
And this got out?
It leaked. And the reaction, especially in the North, was furious, seen as this aggressive pro-slavery land grab. More proof to many that the administration was dominated by Southern interests.
It's really no wonder his own party didn't want him to run again in 1856.
No. Being denied renomination as a sitting president is rare, and it tells you just how unpopular he'd become even within the Democratic Party. His approach had failed. Miserably.
So the legacy is a president who wanted unity but achieved the opposite.
I think that's fair. He tried to preserve the Union by accommodating his most divisive element, slavery, And in doing so, he arguably just pushed it closer to the breaking point.
So 1852, it looked like a vote for calm, for stability, but it was really a major turning
A
point.
huge turning point. The end of one-party system, the Whigs collapsing, and the stage being set for a much more direct confrontation over slavery. It accelerated the path to war.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that sometimes the candidates who promise stability, who avoid the hard truths.
They might end up leading you into even greater turmoil. Trying to keep the peace by ignoring the fundamental problem rarely works out well in the long run.
Which leaves us with a thought for you, the listener. Think about other times, maybe in history or even today, where choosing the seemingly safe path, the path of compromise or avoidance on a really tough issue.
Where did that ultimately lead? Did avoiding the conflict actually prevent it, or just delay it and maybe make it worse? Something to chew on, reflecting on 1852 and Franklin Pierce.